I have a plague series that also post-apocalyptic / coming of age that I've got in the works. But right now I'm working on book 3 of my second zombie apocalypse series. The series I'm working on right now, it's Steel City Apocalypse. It's set at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, and it's set in my hometown, Pittsburgh, PA. And so that's been a lot of fun because I get to highlight a lot of the things that I like about Pittsburgh and the people here. And that's going to be a 5-book series. And then
Oh
my other,
wow.
yeah, it's ambitious.
Oh
My
my
other
god.
my other series is the Undead Age, which is in the same universe. So it's the same zombie apocalypse, but it's set 10 years after. And I wrote that book first, or that series first. And so it's a completely different cast of characters. It's set in California, in the San Jose area, which is where I was living at the time. And and that's a complete series. So if somebody, wants to read it and they decide they like it, they can like read the whole way through. Whereas with this one, book 3 is coming out next year, and we'll see how it goes with the other two. But my background, like by training, I'm a theologian. I went to grad school to be a Unitarian Universalist minister.
Oh
So
wow.
so I have a
Big
Master of
shift.
Divinity. Yes and no. But I decided ordained ministry wasn't where it was at for
In
me.
what way? What do you mean that it wasn't a big shift? How did you
Oh,
t- what did it feel like to you?
well, it took a good 10 years before I started writing after I graduated. But
I see. Okay.
but as a writer, you're always trying to get to the truth of whatever the conflict is or whatever the theme is that you're exploring. And religion and religious faith or spirituality, again, that's people trying to find a kind of cosmic universal truth that helps them make sense of the world. So it's not that different in that sense.
No, it isn't. And I mean, first off, what stood me out at the very beginning is that type of writing. Because, anybody could say writing an apocalypse is easy. Not really. I mean, you mentioned where you use references like, your hometown and places that you've been to. But then the cool thing about apocalyptic, especially like books and thrillers that I love, is it takes you on this really cool adventure and you meet all of these interesting people. But you have, in a way, the author's perspective in mind. Like the author is giving you the perspective of what's going on. And I personally feel that's a difficult skill to obtain as a writer. Do- no?
I would disagree because I think the basis of any story is the whatever the basic conflict is, it's getting to the truth of that conflict, whether it's in a romance where like it's enemies to lovers, or it's a space opera where you've got like galactic empires clashing. Because I mean, post-apocalyptic fiction, one of the things I like about it is that you have people in very extreme circumstances. And so obviously I can do things with characters who are, you know, in a really extreme circumstance, like the zombie apocalypse. I can really push them into these situations that are very, very extreme versus like, a romance, and that's a great place to play with things because you can really get to the heart of like, well, what do people do and why do they do it? And, you know, what's the right choice or the wrong choice, or is
Right.
there a choice?
Or sometimes you can run into those
My
situations where
first series, or The Undead Age, the first book is Love in an Undead Age. My main character is a character she has a really, really strong moral compass, But she has made some really, really morally dubious choices over the course of the book and her backstory. And they're the kind of things that she never would have done had she lived a regular life and not had the experience of living in the zombie apocalypse. But she did have the experience of living in the zombie apocalypse. So her lived experience has changed her, not just in terms of what's happened to her, but in terms of her frame of reference for what is necessary versus what is right is very different than it would have been otherwise. So, and like,
Right.
that's fun. Like, some people who've read my book, that they don't like that. They want their heroes and heroines to always do the right thing. But I don't find that super interesting, because getting people into morally dubious areas where they make maybe not the right decision, you can really muck around and get your fingers dirty and have a lot of fun with that.
No, and I definitely feel that's important. Character development, especially seeing the story, reading the story, seeing it how it unfolds, um, chapter to chapter. It's exciting. It's really fun. You from what you learn from the very beginning to what you finish at the very end. I always enjoy that experience because you never necessarily know what you're going to expect, even though like you may know what the story is going to be about, but there's always twists and turns.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, before I started writing, I would hear writers say, well, and then the character went and did this thing that I wasn't expecting. And I thought that was something people just said to like sound like writerly. But sometimes they do that. You were planning to do one thing, and then the character, you're writing it, and that's not how it's being written. And you realize that, like, okay, what I had in mind wasn't right for the character, but as I'm writing it, I'm getting what's right, and it's not coming. I mean, yeah, maybe it's coming from me, but it feels like it's coming from the character. So
Well, I feel that there, especially in our minds, there's a deep connection between the subconscious, the back part of our brains, where there is information that's coming from there, especially when you're dealing with artists that we, in a way, don't know how to describe.
hmm
The way that we create these stories, and the way sometimes I create progressions or songs or create art pieces, I know where it's coming from in my head, right? But can I fully explain it? No.
yeah, sometimes you don't really understand why you've headed down a particular path. And I've also found that, like, artists have such, even in the same medium, have such different creative processes. Like, I tend to think that of myself as a real kind of nuts and bolts kind of writer. Like, I really like to write from an outline. I outlines, of course, change because as you're writing a story, you get a feel for the characters, you get to know them better. Sometimes you just have a great idea, so you incorporate that. But like, I always know where I'm going and where I want to end up. And and I approach it in a very kind of straightforward XYZ way. I have a friend who like experiences her creative process as information from the universe just being downloaded through her. And that, like, it's something that's already done, and it arrives fully formed for her to do, and like, I think that's cool. But I mean, I have like not a supernatural bone in my body, I swear. So, like, that's not my thing, and, like,
But
I always
that's a
find
good
what.
point, though.
Yeah, and just like, people like to talk about the muse or where their muse takes them and this, that, and the other, and I understand the whole concept of the muse, but I honestly find it really annoying because that's not how I approach things. I think there are two ways there's writing and there's not writing. And waiting around for some mystical inspiration to strike is just not writing as far as I'm concerned. So and I find that the more I write regularly, the more I want to write, the better quality of ideas I have. I have more ideas than I do when I'm not. And so, so I approach it really, really pragmatically, which and very in a very concrete way. I, I'm a really concrete kind of person. Like sometimes the things I miss because they're not concrete. I mean, like it's embarrassing, but so like and my friend like I talk about that and she's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. That makes
Well,
no sense to me.
you bring up an excellent point because there are different types of artists in the same, as you say, genre. You
Hmm.
know, there are writers, like you said, that very nuts and bolts. They have the outline, the layout. There are types of writers that need to literally go to the jungles of India to actually write things. And then you have writers that just need to be in a box. There are
Hmm.
people that will lock themselves in a room and that's how they write. But it all stems from creativity,
Hmm.
right? They're all stemming to create something. So whether you want to label it mystic, there is a process that's going on in their brains that when they enter this mode, they're in that zone.
Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the urge to create is just like one of the most basic, fundamental things about human beings. And whatever form it takes. So it's
Whether mystical.
yeah, yeah. It's a universal element of being human. You know.
Yeah, for sure. It really I mean I think every person when they start their craft, you know, whether it be particularly when you talk about writing, there are many different avenues that people go. Not everybody goes to creating novels or books. Some people go to writing poems. People can go to be comedy writers or script writers or journalists, and I mean, it's amazing to think that it all starts with somebody wanting to put words on a piece of paper.
Well, I think it's a little more fundamental than that. It's just people wanting to tell a story, you know? For whatever reason, they've got this story in their head and they want to share it with people or at least get it out of their head. And, so I think that's where it starts. It's like, you've got this idea of a story of these people or entities that you've never met, but you think you'd like to you think you'd like to tell their story.
Do you want to walk us through your story process? For example, when you are creating your books or writing.
Sure. Sure, and there's the dogs I warned you about.
Oh,
So,
that's fine.
yeah, I
They
have
add to the excitement and enjoyment.
yeah, I've 7-month-old, blue heeler mixed puppies, and they are zippy. They also wanna be fed, and my husband's coming home, he's gonna feed them, so it's gonna be all kinds of mayhem. Well, my process with writing what? I'm so sorry, I don't think he has his keys. Give me 1 sec.
Sure.
I mean, for me, it just like when I wrote the first book, like I had been working, as a
All about the artist. That is the whole purpose of this podcast, period. And you have a really valuable tool. You can share this with artists, people that are creative, someone that can enjoy this podcast and really enjoy the experience of Lost in the Groove. So, with that, let's jump back to today's episode, shall we?
administrative assistant for a lot of years, and I didn't really like the work. I liked where I worked. I worked at Santa Clara University, which is in the first series, and but I was like, okay, I need to quit screwing around. I need to like write. I've been talking about it forever. So I decide, but I was really intimidated by it. Like writing a book is a big thing. Like it's a book. That's a lot of words, you know?
Sometimes it's 300 pages.
Yeah, exactly, you know? So, you know, that was very intimidating. So I thought, well, I should write something that'll be easy to write. So I thought, okay, I'll write a chick lit book. Okay. Which the hubris is astounding, you know, as if that kind of book is easier to write than another kind of book. Books are hard to write. Doesn't matter what you're writing. so so anyway, so I thought, okay, that's what I'm gonna write. It won't be hard. Ha ha. And and my ideas were terrible because I don't really read that genre very much. Like I've read a couple at the beach or, you know, picked up a book in the airport because I forgot my book or whatever. So
Right.
my idea sucked. And I would tell my husband, hey, this is my idea. And he'd be like, that is pretty terrible. And I was like, yeah, so this is my idea. And he's like, no, I don't think so. So like we did this for about a month, you know, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, one day I was telling him my latest bad idea, and he was like, and I was like, too bad it can't have zombies. We just kind of looked at each other. It was like, that's what I should be writing. I should be writing a zombie adventure. So for me, again, like I tend to be like really very concrete. So for me, my idea is, you know, what's the setting? What kind of character do I want? What's going to be the fundamental conflict? What's, you know, and then, you know, who are going to be the people in the story? How do I, you know, hash it out? Because like over the weekend, he and I banged out a plot, you know, not an outline or anything, but a basic plot, you know, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, you know, X, Y, and Z, how this is going to happen. So for me, that's how it worked with that first series. Now about, I don't know, I don't remember how far along I was in the book, but I would, and this is the interesting thing because like other art influences your art. So I was listening to Mattis Yahoo a lot. And sometimes when I listen to music, I'll get stuck on a song and I'll just like put it on repeat and listen to that
Wait a
song
minute.
over and
Did you
over.
say Matasiyahu?
Yeah, yeah. I was listening to his Light album a lot. And anyway, and I was listening to We Will Walk. That was the song I was stuck on. So I
This is amazing.
yeah, so I get stuck on this song and you know and you know the guy singing to this woman, and it does not sound like things are going well for them in this song, you know, like things aren't going well. And you know, their ability to like live and be together is really seems pretty poor. And so I'm stuck on the song, and all of a sudden I thought, wow, what if my character ended up with this person instead of that person? Which was completely not something I was planning, you know, and it changed the whole story. It changed the whole series, you know, and you know, and the person I wanted, you know, I thought, well, that would be cool. It was a bad guy, you know, and you know, and like that, I could not have her end up with this horrible person. And so, you know, my husband's like, well, you know, I don't, he's got to be good somehow. There's got to be something redeeming about him. But it changed the entire series. I was not looking for that to happen, but just listening to this song got something going in my brain. And then one day it was like, wow, what if this happened? So I guess I have a lot of what if too. Like when I'm laying out a story, one of the things I like to do is ask myself, "Aw, oh,
This
cute
is my
kitty,
little squeaker.
very cute." I love calicos. I had a calico. but I like to ask myself, what if? So, well, what if so and so did this? What if? And sometimes I'll get these big long lists of what ifs that'll help me like figure out which one is the most interesting to explore, you know? So so that's kind of a lot of how I do it, you know? But it is interesting because you're never you never know what might influence you to change a story or to like want to start a story either, you know. And
An inspiration.
yeah, like inspiration comes, it literally can come from out of the blue like a bolt from the blue, you know. And then everything's different, you know. Or sometimes it's just even like a tiny little thing, but it's a little tiny thing that makes a big difference.
No, it's funny because I relate to this so well. When it comes to the little things, the sound from the record player, or the sound of the books, when you're turning the pages. We we tend to not notice things a lot of the times. And when you make that type of writing, and again, you're putting people in very extreme conditions, when you're in those extreme conditions, you really have to listen because it's life or death.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I never thought of that. But yeah, you really do. You're blowing my mind.
Listen, that's the point of this podcast. But I want to touch on something you said earlier, because sometimes you get caught in this like box, what you were saying with your writing, and
Mhm.
then you're like, oh, that's what I needed. You do you feel it was a limit, or did you know before that you wanted to do that, or was it that just hit of the moment of like, oh my god, maybe I should be writing that
Oh, about
instead?
what should I be writing versus what? Well, you know, I think that was fear. The idea that I couldn't do it,
Yeah,
that I was afraid, that was fear, and fear was dictating a choice. And good good decisions never are made from a place of fear. Never. You know, I love the line from Dune, you know, fear is the mind killer. And and it really is, you know. So yeah, so that was it. And it was kind of funny because when I said, oh, too bad it can't have, it was it was just a completely spontaneous thought, you know, a wish, you know, because I was frustrated. And then like there it was, you know. So because I was not thinking about writing Zombie at all. So even though I love that, and I love, you know, post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, because I just like seeing what people do, you know. And it's interesting, and why some people go the crappy route and some people go the better, what we think of as the better route. And you know, sometimes people don't even know why they're doing it, or it's not even a conscious choice, it's just this is just where they have ended up.
yeah.
So you know.
I it's funny because it kind of ties back to the story of like the origin of this podcast. I remember I was talking with my therapist, and I was just saying I was just so tired of not having a place of pure communication, open mindedness and actual perspective. And she said, "Why don't you do something about it?" I'm like, "What am I supposed to do?" Just pure fear of like, who am I? And fast forward 2 years, I met with somebody, and I was telling him this exact story. And he's like, "Why don't you just do a podcast?" I was like, "Okay. With whom?" He's like, "I'll do it with you." I was like, "Okay." And that's how it started. But instantaneous moment, where it's like, oh, I never thought of that. There's an idea.
Yeah, well, and it is amazing how, we all get locked into our field of vision, of our way of looking at things. So you do need people to pull the blinders off and widen your field of vision, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I guess I could do that I didn't even think of that, but it's right there.
right in front of you.
Yep.
How have you felt personally, your development with your writing since you started with the chiclets, and figuring out putting zombies
Felt how?
in your writing, in your own craft, and how you developed your stories?
Well, I'm a better writer than I was when I started. I was lucky in that right when I decided to start writing, a friend of mine who I didn't know was a writer was putting a writing group together. So, and I was lucky in that it ended up being a really good writing group and I learned a lot. So, I'm a better writer than I was. I'm a lot more confident about it. I don't worry that, like, I'm not intimidated by the idea of writing a book, you know?
You feel you've conquered that fear?
Oh, well, I should hope so. 5 books later, yeah.
For
If I
sure.
haven't, then I've got some problems that that'll need more than this podcast to figure out.
Oh boy.
But, yeah, I'm more confident in it. I have more fun with it, you know? In some ways, I take it more seriously because, I this is something I wanna be able to keep doing forever. But in other ways, I don't take it so seriously because it's a story, and it's important to me to write the story, but it's not the end of the world one way or the other. The story in the story it might be, but for me personally, you try it out and see how it goes. See if it sticks, and if it doesn't, try something else.
What's been your progress so far with your books? What type of interaction you've seen, and have you been able to build yourself a community?
Yeah, yeah, I've been lucky that way. I started out well, I interact with a lot of people online, whether through Facebook or Instagram. Like when I started out, because I'm a self-published author, I had no idea how to start. Like, what the heck do you do? And luckily, I signed up for this webinar with this romance writer, Alessandra Torrey, who is just like a fantastic human being because I've subsequently met her in real life, and she's great. But it was like this romance. She was giving like a best. She was a best New York Times bestseller, and she was offering this webinar about how to get started as an indie author. And I thought, hey, it's not what I want to write, but she must know what she's doing. So and she turned me on to there's whole groups on Facebook. It's all about writing and writers, and it never occurred to me that like people might use that particular medium that way. So yeah, so I've been able to get a community online. I've also in the last year and a half started doing live events, and like Comic Cons, and go for the weekend, and stand behind the table and see if I can sell a couple books. And what I found out, which I wasn't expecting, is the best part of the Comic Cons has literally nothing to do with selling books. It's meeting all the people. Like the creativity at a Comic Con with people's costumes
Costumes,
is
anime. It's
just
amazing.
off the hook. It's just crazy, and everybody's just like there to have a good time, and I'm at this like sci-fi horror convention. It's like, oh my god, these are my people. How did I not do this before? And so that's been very cool because I sometimes I see people more than once, or they'll tell me, oh, I I told my friend about, your books, and they really like them. Or like just this past weekend, I was at a little conference called Living Dead Weekend, and it was all about Night of the Living Dead and George Romero stuff. And like they had the actors from the original Night of the Living Dead there, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
And this guy and I were talking, and so he bought the first two books in my new series, and I saw him out in the hallway, and he was reading the book, and I said, "Oh, you already started?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I did." And I mean, I like it so far. And I was like, "Well, good." So before he left at the end of the day, he came back and he bought my other books, the whole series. And I was like, "Whoa." And he said, "I like what I'm reading, and I know I'll like the rest." I was like, "Great, that's awesome." I mean, that makes me really happy. And then he comes in the next day and he says, 200 pages. That's how far I am. And I stayed up until 2 in the morning.
Oh my
And
God.
I was like,
Commitment.
you know what? That is the best compliment a writer could ever get.
Aw.
It
Yeah.
really is. And so, and regardless of whether or not, but see, if he had bought the book online, I would never know that. I would never have had a chance to like to stand around and shoot the shit with him. I would never have been able to sit there and have him tell me all the things he thought were cool or that surprised him, or that he thought I was on the right track, and and or how he thought it tied into this larger trope in the or idea in the world of zombie fiction, which quite frankly I never thought of. But hey, I'll take it. So it's
There's 1,001 ways of writing about zombies.
seriously, but it's just been, like that stuff is great, and I mean, I just absolutely love that. I love meeting people and finding out, why they're there, and taking pictures with them with their costumes, and I do sell books, and that makes me happy, but it's literally not the thing that makes it awesome to do those kind of events. So I have been able to do a community, not just around my books, but also as a writer. Like my three writing besties, they're all out on the West Coast. They're in Washington State and California. And so that's cool. And I mean, I know writers from South Africa,
Oh,
you
wow.
know, from Europe, all over Europe, so that's cool too, because I've been able to connect with them online, and that's and we'll work together trying to help each other promote each other's books and stuff, so you get to know people as you work on different projects with them, and that's really cool too. I mean, it's funny because the thing I never even thought about when I set out on this was the community that I would find, both with readers and with writers, and, I have found the writing community to be one that is unfailingly generous and kind, and people are so eager to share their knowledge with you. And when you first set out at this, it's not a learning curve, it's like a cliff, and you're standing there at the bottom of this cliff,
Preach, honey, preach.
and it just seems so overwhelming, and then somebody throws a rope over, and then 10 people throw ropes over, and so it's really cool. And I mean, if I never ever, were able to say, "Oh, I can, make a living at this or whatever," I would still do it because it's just been such a big, positive, wonderful addition to my life.
We unfortunately live in a world where there is a lot of misery because a
Mhm.
lot of people are doing things that they don't want to do.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can say for myself, I work a corporate job. I work a 9 to 5, but I do have a second job and I also do this. So I have 2 things a week that I get to look forward to. I get to be in a kitchen. I get to be around cool people. have fun experiences, and then also be able to do this, talk with you, have a great experience, learn something. I learned a lot so far now. But having that in your life doesn't matter money. Like, it's like a drug. Just give it to me.
Oh, yeah, and, I totally worked the whole 9 to 5 thing for years and, did jobs that, some I liked, some I didn't,
It's part of life.
some I liked the people and the place, but the work itself, stick a fork in my eye. But, I mean, that's you gotta like, get through life and I'm lucky enough now that, my husband was like, look, if you want to do this, just do it. I'll sell my soul and work the corporate job and make the money. And you take some time and really give this a go because I think you can do it. So I'm
Oh,
really
wow.
lucky. Now, it's also dangerous because, when you have only yourself to answer to, that can get dangerous to get too. But so it's a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, but
But
that's also that's a level of trust that you have with somebody.
oh,
Where you're telling them like, look, I want you to be successful, so I'm going to do this because I want to see you successful. And I think that's the most powerful thing. Just having somebody that has your back when you need it.
oh,
God.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is a blessing, and like just I feel so lucky to have that in my life, and I know I am because some people don't have that.
I know. And you know, I feel, especially like as an artist or whatever type of artist that you are, having that sense of community, having that ability to communicate freely and be able to express, like, this is not an easy world to be in.
Mm-mm. It
You're,
is not.
if you're a creative person, it's a fucking hard roll, and you don't know what you're gonna get. It may be a 6, it may be a 2, maybe just 3 and a 4. You never
Yeah,
know. It's so
yeah.
unpredictable.
Well, and it's just it's there's our society doesn't function in a way that feeds people's souls. You know, the capitalist societies, they aren't about, humane people first, and so it's really hard to carve out those spaces where you get to do something that isn't about that, you know? And it can be hard when, you're in a society that demands a level of conformity and you don't fit. You don't fit that shape, you're a star shape and you're a star peg and it's a square hole. I mean,
It's not gonna work.
no, it's not gonna work. So, you have to find those other places where you can get that.
And I think that one of the many benefits of the internet that has allowed us to do things what we're doing now, just the ability to communicate. And that's a really cool thing about Comic-Con and conventions and places for people to come together. It allows people to communicate in the best way. Yes, a lot of the time communication interaction is done through the internet, but
Mhm.
sometimes those interactions lead to physical interactions.
Oh, yeah, like, two of my writing friends, the ones in California, we decided we were just BSing online one day and about like, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to have wouldn't it be great to, like, get together and have a retreat," And I was like, "Well, I have a friend who has a cabin, he might lend it to us," and I'm thinking and I was just saying it. I wasn't serious about it because why would they wanna come here to Pennsylvania, And
Hey, it's Dave, and I quickly just wanted to jump in and say if you've been enjoying the podcast and enjoying this episode, if you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, that'll be so greatly appreciated. Because here's the thing, Someone might read that review and make the choice if they want to listen to the podcast. You get to help grow this podcast with us. How fucking cool is that? Let's jump back to today's episode.
And they were like, well, what's it like? So anyway, we ended up getting together. They both came to Pennsylvania. We went up to my friend's place for a week. He lent it to us for a week. And all of our husbands were like, you guys have never met in real life. Are you sure about this? Like, you're all going off for a week. And we were all like, yeah, it's going to be great, which it was. And yeah, but you get to do things like that, or like, that author I mentioned, Alessandra Torre, she ended up putting together a writer conference, a couple years after I started. And so I got to go to this writer conference and meet all these people. I got to meet her. And, and so, it can lead to these real life interactions, which, just makes it even cooler.
It is. And one of the things that we forget about that happened about 3 years ago was we didn't have interaction. We were behind screens. And the thing about humans is that we're not pairs, we're groups.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to other creatures, like we're one of the only ones where we can come together as 100 and we're fine.
Yeah,
and
we're herd animals.
we're a little different. Just a tiny bit.
But basically, we really like to have a lot of to have others have us around. It feels safer when you think about all the big wide world and all the things out there that might be dangerous or scary. If you've got a couple people around, then it doesn't feel so bad.
Yeah, but like, think about it when you're in an apocalyptic. Imagine if there's a nuclear war, which, believe it or not, unfortunately, is very is possible. I
It's
mean,
possible, sure.
it's definitely possible. If a nuclear war happens and you happen to be in a small pocket and manage to survive, okay, and there's maybe 4, 5 people in your group. Now, there's no communication for miles. I mean, you have no idea what's going on around you. And like, probably in your head, you're thinking you may be the last people alive. I can't even fathom that. I can't.
Well, see, I would think if I was in that situation that I really screwed up, because if that happens, I want to go out in the first strike, man. I do not want to be alive to live through all that nonsense. I mean, I live in a city, we're right on the edge of a city and major metropolitan area. And, in addition to the many wonderful things I like about living in a city, something like that happens, I'm going to get vaporized right off the bat. And I don't have to deal with all that misery, which, kind of maybe undercuts my credibility. But, radiation and a life without Sudafed and, that's just not my idea of a good time. Having to deal with spring allergies without Sudafed is my idea of hell.
Well, oh my god, yeah. I mean, everything would be toxic, so
Oh yeah.
you wouldn't be able to use anything.
Oh no, no. I'd rather just go out that first wave.
Have you written an apocalyptic story during a nuclear war?
No, I have written a short story about a teenager and a plague that I'm actually going to, and ironically enough, I was writing this short story as COVID was breaking, and as all that was coming out in the news, and it was weird. It was creepy as fuck.
Oh, I remember.
But like, here I am writing about a plague, and this whole pandemic is like kicking off, and nobody knows how bad it's going to be. And so, that's a story that, like, so I wrote this little novella, it's about, I don't know, 15,000 words long, and maybe not that long, maybe 5, I don't know. But but after I finished that, I thought, man, I could like actually make a book out of this. Like I could make a whole trilogy, around this whole theme and this kid. And so I will. I've got it, roughly thought out in my head, and I'm hoping I'll get started on that when I finish the current series I'm working on. So,
It's a
but
lot.
no, not nuclear war. That's well, and you know what else too
What?
is like the reason I like zombies and I like plagues and stuff is I am not a big research person. Okay, I mean like EMP stuff is really big right now. And like it's cool, it's interesting, but you know what, I don't want to spend my time doing a lot of research about all the ins and outs of an EMP and Faraday cages and this and that and the other and what will work and what won't work, and I don't want to like spend my time trying to having to do all this research about like radiation sickness and just how far out you have to be to survive it. I don't want to do that. I'm kind of lazy that way. Like I'll do the research I need to do, but like I don't want to have to like get into something where like if I get it wrong, people are going to be like, dude, you got it wrong. And they will, trust me. Like the people who read the EMP stuff, they know this stuff. And the people who read nuclear apocalypse books, they know. And, so I just,
I mean, they're prepared when it happens.
well, whether they're prepared or not, they're going to be very ready to tell you that you don't know what the heck you're doing. Um, and they wasted, $3 to have you not know what you're doing,
Oh my god.
So so yeah, so that's another thing. Whereas, plagues and zombies, that's very well, I mean, zombies they're just the ultimate because you can just make it whatever you want it to be.
You know, it's funny because in real life there is a zombie disease. It's called rabies.
Well, yeah, but they don't once they die, they don't get back up and
I
get
know
you.
that, but just like imagine, like there's that's the thing about zombies. That's what I was saying earlier. Like there's 1,001 ways of making zombies. Like you don't have to be. Nobody gives a fuck if you're accurate with zombies. Come on.
Exactly. No, the big debate is, fast versus slow zombies, that's the big thing. But, you can make it whatever you want, And so, and that's one of the things I like about, sci-fi and to an extent, like hard science fiction. Okay, you got to, do some things right. But with a lot of things it's very elastic and there's a lot of wiggle room to play with things and make them different. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, and I kind of love that kind of character line and play because you really get to see another. Not everything that you're reading has to necessarily be real.
Oh,
N-
yeah, I agree.
Sometimes, there's a reason why we have fiction and nonfiction, and there is great literature that has a lot of research in it. And I really appreciate you bringing up this point. You don't always need to be a great writer with tons of research. You could be a great writer with less research, or you have your focus on other things that give you creativity to write.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I have friends who like they love to do that research. They love to go down that rabbit hole and spend the time and do it. And they're like, I love research, and I'm just like, oh God, that's just not my idea of a good time.
No,
But I
to each
did
their own,
enough of
honey.
that in school. I don't want to have to keep doing it now.
Uh, what type of inspirations? You've touched on this earlier, but with your books, I know that you mentioned that you got inspired by the place that you're in, the place that you were in California. But were there other things that gave you inspiration with your writing?
Well, one of the things I like about the zombie genre, and not everybody does this, but George Romero in Night of the Living Dead, he was he always incorporated social commentary into his movies, you know. And
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, in 1968, the hero was a black man in Night of the Living Dead, and he was, trying to escape from zombies with a white woman. You didn't have a lot of black men or women being the hero or the heroine of a film. You didn't have them calling the shots like the character of Ben does in Night of the Living Dead. In Dawn of the Dead, like the film starts out at a race riot, and the police, and I mean, in the opening scene, you're dealing with Cuban separatists who are fighting against the police who are beating people up indiscriminately. So he's got like politics, because at the time in the early 80s, there were a lot of different separatist movements in the 70s and 80s, like the American Indian movement and the move. I can't think of what it
There
stands
was a
for,
lot
but
of movements.
there were tons of movements, and so he's got like racism. He's got racism. He's got police brutality, all right there in the first couple minutes of this zombie movie. And and also like in his like in Night of the Living Dead, and the movie's like 55 years old, so it's very of its time. The women are kind of passive. They don't really have much agency. But by the time he made Dawn of the Dead, he had the women's movement had happened, and the main female character, like, she's right in there. She is demanding to be taken seriously and to have an equal voice in things. So
Right.
and she's got a lot of agency over what's going to happen to her. Like, she's not waiting around for somebody to save her. So so he did that, and social commentary is something I love, and when it's done right, the people who like social commentary see it and they recognize it and they can enjoy it, and the people who don't notice it, they can still enjoy the book too. And sometimes people don't like it and they won't read your book anymore, and that's okay. My book doesn't have to be for everybody, and they don't have to like every book. But so like when I was writing The Undead Age, I was, thinking about things like the iniquities in healthcare access in American society. And that's why I had a society where there was a cure for the zombie virus, but you couldn't necessarily get it, you know, like healthcare in the United States. We can treat a lot of things, but
Long
not
podcast
everybody
on
can get
that.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just things like that. I was kind of like, and the idea of like, groups that have a lot of power, and how they treat people, and how their basic orientation, whatever they're organized around, can make them a positive thing or a negative thing. So that's one of the things. That was another thing that was an inspiration for me, is just having this subtext woven in there. So,
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it adds a deeper element to it. Something that comes to mind is Alien. I love
mhm,
Alien. It's one of my
yeah,
favorite movies. And in a way, it does have a social commentary because if you think about it, any one of us watching that film could have been on that spacecraft.
mhm,
Okay, I mean, any one of us. They look just like us, and they had to experience that terror. And just imagining her running around the craft, like not even knowing if she's going to make it, and you
mhm.
feeling just the humanity inside of her, that like she's been put into this position. It's so of its time, but it's
Well,
still so modern.
and and not just that she's feeling this terror, but they were sent there by the company
Yeah,
because the company sensed an opportunity to make money. And their whole point was like, well, we don't care what happens to the crew; they're expendable, you know. And because we
She
might be able
realizes that
to,
in the end of the film. I remember,
yeah, yeah, when it says, "What about the crew?" Expendable, and and so that was yeah, I mean, that was a very stark commentary on our society, and those kind of themes are still being made, they're still being
they're
explored.
still relevant. They're still
Oh yeah.
important to explore, and um, it's the way. I guess not the in depth, but I guess the way that it's presented. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah, yeah, because Alien is also your classic haunted house when you think about it. People trapped in a remote location with a monster or a ghost or whatever. I mean, it's that trope, and this house just happens to be in space, and
right?
this monster just happens to be an alien, so it's fun stuff.
Well, I was going to ask you. For anybody that's listening, they want to find your books, kind of interact with the work that you're doing, maybe possibly bump into you at a Comic-Con. Where can they find you? And all that jazz. All that jazz.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've got a website. It's www.am That's G as in George, V as in Victor, .com. I am on Facebook and Instagram at the same AM Geever. I have my books are sold everywhere, so you can find them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple, Kobo, Google. You can probably find them other places. I've got some audio, the first two Undead Age books. So, if you like audio, you can get my stuff at the library. If your library doesn't have it, ask the librarian, especially for ebooks, they'll usually get them for you. And then as far as Comic Cons, I'm not sure. I don't have anything planned for the rest of the year. I'm probably going to go to Steel City Con here in Pittsburgh next April. But I haven't really thought about next year and what I'm going to do, though I would like to do more live events than I did this year.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. I mean, it's a great way to connect, and got a website,
awesome.
So everything's in one place.
Yeah, everything's at the website, and I have my own store too. So if people,
Nice.
want to support me directly, which is great because I get a larger cut of the money versus 30% at one place or 50% at another.
Right.
So artists always appreciate if you support them directly.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, listen, and it's also a great way to interact and always learn more. One of the best ways to start your creative journey is with the first click. You gotta like and subscribe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, with that, if you want to learn more about the podcast, you can find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Lost in the Groove Pod. So with that, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. I guess we'll catch you on the next one.
All right. Thank you. I had a great time.
All right. Bye.